Hello and welcome back to the channel and another tutorial for PGA Tour 2K25, and in my opinion the most important one, because this one is focusing on gameplay, on archetypes, and just generally how different people may set up their builds. So we want to make sure for all of our courses that they're enjoyable for everyone as much as possible. And also that they are challenging and interesting, and there's loads that we're going to have to bear in mind, given that they've brought in new physics, new shot types, different builds, and everything is going to be a little bit different to what we've experienced before. And that is all great. So whilst the visual stuff is lovely, what's under the hood is far more important for us. So I'm going to spend this video going through all of the things that you want to factor into your own course designs. Now, the good news is that normal design principles, good architectural concepts, those still hold true. If you were designing good courses in 23, that will still be the case. There are still a few things that you're going to want to check on that are slightly different for this build, however. So do follow along carefully. That said, some of those core principles become even more important for ensuring that everyone can enjoy the game and play the course as you intend it. So, first of all, though, we're going to leap into the My Players and look at those. Enjoy. So looking at my players, and you can get a load of different builds. I've gone with Greenskeeper and pretty much maxed out power. Now that's got to 285, but that's pre-fittings. So fittings could potentially bring that up. And if we were looking at the golf bag, for example, you can see that you get different clubs at different distances. So you could go 3-wood, 250 odd, 230 odd, 2-iron, and those are kind of your gaps. But say we were using a different archetype from the get-go and you've got a powerhouse, well, we could theoretically bump him up to 99 power, and that takes up to 297 pre-fittings. There's a lot of difference, but you could also choose to pour your stats elsewhere to address some of those deficiencies. Point being, people are going to play it differently. Now again, with a third base archetype, this one's a magician. You can see he's at 276 to start with and can go up to a max of 284, so 290. So we can see straight away there's like a 7-yard difference between 15 skill points. So people may not put everything into power, they may instead go to contact, which would limit how much power they can put on. Now this could all be further customized by where they put their skill points, so they could go down the power drive route, in which case they can probably push it a little bit further. They could be going someone who wants to be more of an attack-based irons player and more precise, or have more different types of shots going into green, which would react differently. They could go for recovery route, potentially, so they can kind of find their way out of trouble. The pick shot would definitely help bunker play, or they could pour everything into green skills. The point being, there's loads of different ways you could choose to play that just by how you set up your player. So what does this mean for us kind of globally? Well, essentially we need to understand that every player is going to experience our course ever so slightly differently. For some players, they can clear certain hazards, they can't clear others. For some players, they're going to be on the fairway whole time, but hitting longer clubs into the greens. For others, they're going to be bombing it way down, but they might be coming out of the rough. Some people will fear bunkers. Some people won't be so bothered by that. Some people will be really good once they get on the greens, but it's more of a challenge to get there. And that's kind of wonderful, frankly. We want that variety, and hopefully the difficulty of the game holds up so that there's not one single archetype that people gravitate towards. Bearing in mind as well that hitting the fairway may not be trivial. So another thing that I would strongly recommend is only putting bunkers on one side of the fairway. Again, pretty common and well-held architectural principle. But for example, on this 18th, there's bunkers down the right, not on the left. Well, if people want to bail out, they can do. They have a longer approach. But that might mean some people are aiming towards this side because they know their miss is right. One other thing that's always worth reiterating, it is absolutely fine to allow a safe 3-wood play on a longer par 4 if it means that that second shot gets exponentially tougher the further back from the green you get. So here, for example, if you want 170 into this green, that's fine. You're probably going to make a pretty safe par unless your iron game is awful because there's a load of space around the green, but you're reducing your chances of birdie. Generally, allowing people to make an easy par is a good decision. Furthermore, you're not going to need to angle fairways as much, and you're not going to need to put bunkers both sides. If you do, it might be the occasional one time that you do, and if you're doing that, I would suggest staggering them vertically. There will be a meta eventually, but we shouldn't try and set that at the start. So understand that putting bunkers at a certain distance is probably not the way. You want to scatter them at different lengths and distances. Some of them, diagonal hazards, will always be good because people can choose which one they take on. Say this hole, for example, they can choose whether they want the 250 carry, they can play out this way, They can go close to this bunker because they know they can't quite clear that, or they can try and go over it. Given that there's all sorts of different skill sets of golfers, we should try and produce more different types of courses. You don't need to go crazy with the greens anymore. You could go for a very tight course, which would favour those who are less offline. You could go for something where the greens are really fast and it's quite long, so therefore that's going to favour your power hitters who can get on in two a little bit more. You can go for the wide strategic course if you want to, of course, but it doesn't mean to say that there's going to be one single type of course, and that for us should be really liberating. Looking at this hole, and the next thing I wanted to look at was rollout. So if we're going to hit a driver down here, you've got to understand now that the physics are such that this is going to roll a lot further than we were used to. So you can see it bouncing, and that's got a pretty good chance of reaching those bunkers if I am not very, very careful. Weird bump there. And so it actually ended up in the light rough as well. Say we rewind and hit a 3-wood, you get a similar thing. So decent swing. This one's quite a way back, but look how far this is going to go. And admittedly, the hole is downhill, but from where it lands to where it goes, that's going to bring a lot more hazards into play, and we're not going to have to manufacture ground game quite so much. And the same is true for other shot types, such as the Stinger, which you can see here. Again, 256 odd carry, but look again how much this rolls out. So lands at 263, and it's going pretty much as far as that very first kind of partial driver that we hit. Additionally, we now get balls rolling onto the green much better than we ever did before. So here we're going to play 7-iron just short of the green, and hopefully if we hit a half decent shot, you can see that that will kick forward, and when it goes onto the green, it also doesn't accelerate like crazy like it would have done in 23. It just rolls kind of as you would expect. The other thing that's pretty cool is now that back bunkers are kind of much more in play, because the ball will not necessarily land on these greens and stop dead, which again is more fun for us. I'm going to try and hit one in here. So we've got a 5-iron that's going downwind. Now in 23, that's not doing this. So this would have kind of landed and stuck in the rough. It's maybe not the best example, but you'll get the idea. And one other thing that's pretty clear is that if you're missing it, having short grass does not necessarily leave an easy up and down, and it certainly makes it interesting. So you can see the ball rolling around down here and finding a little hollow, which is always good fun. I'm going to look at the short game shot types a little bit more, but with that rolling, this can end up down here without us having to exaggerate the slopes quite as much as we would have done. And additionally, because the flop shot is not so easy, this one is kind of gives us a load of options. We could stun it in here, we can try and carry it over, you could try and flop it up, you could try and use this slope. There's a lot that you can do with this type of shot to make it interesting, far more than you can with a bunker. Now my next point is far more of a general one, which is that with any new game, it's harder. There is increased difficulty, and we're pushing for it to be as hard as it possibly can be on Master and Legend. That's beneficial for us because it means that simple can be good. An easy game is not good for designers because it means we have to artificially trick up courses, which it's a bit of a tightrope. Whereas if we can produce holes where there is clear danger, but also reward, take this one a short par 4, you could lay up here, but that water maybe really scares some people, so they might go to down here, which also brings that bunker into play, which might scare different people. With the rollout, these two could come more into play. If they're going for the green and they're rolling through, are they worried about the OB long? Are they worried about this really big pot bunker in front? There's not too much going on here, I would argue, but the way in which the game now plays means that more of it is relevant, which is great for us. Now, one mantra I firmly believe in is that simple done well can be very, very effective and good, and far better than cluttered holes that try to defend absolutely everything. A good example for this is 5, I would say. You've got a green that is pretty light green and sloping very heavily from right to left, which means if you're leaving it up here, you've got a tough chip shot down. But you'll notice there's no bunkers around this side. If people want to miss it here, they can do. That's just a different kind of challenge. But if they're wanting to try and go for the green, they've got a bunker there to think about if they're going longer and going towards this pin, or they can just play to the centre of the green and have a decent putt. Now that difficulty extends to putting as well. Putting is tough, particularly when your golfer is not leveled up. Bearing in mind I have the greenskeeper archetype on, it's quite hard to work out exactly how much break you're putting on, And additionally, the transition penalties or your rhythm on putts, meaning you can over and under hit them, you don't have the vibration on. That takes a lot of time to learn, particularly from distance. So we don't need to go as crazy with our greens. And we're going to go through some examples. And you can still go crazy with some of your greens if you want to. You just want to play test it and check how it works. This one has a sunken back shelf, but everything is really feeding towards it. And that's only really hurting for one pin, which is this one. So in that case, you're just playing a little close to this bunker if you want to get at that pin. Another green I wanted to comment on was the 9th green, because this is an example of one where we've seen this knoll type of design before. Everything falls off. It's plopped right up on the top of the hill, big false front. All we're asking the player to do is basically get their distance control right, end up on the green. Once you're on there though, pretty straightforward. There's one little slope that's helping you towards this pin, and that's about it. Everything else is just there. Because the challenge is not on the green. We want people to hit the green and then reward them for doing that. The mistake is missing this green anywhere, and that's enough of a punishment that once they're on the green, they should get a decent enough look. One thing that is good to have back is the fact that bunkers now actually play as hazards. So if we pop the ball in one of them, which hopefully this will go straight for it, you can see that when you land, your proximity of the lip to the lip really affects how this is going to play. And the fact is that if I take too much club out of this, it's not getting out, for example. Now, therefore, things we need to consider are just, again, varying how these are. This type of bunker with kind of raised lips, in the old game, this would launch much, much higher and clear it. The new game has much better physics. So that, for example, if I'm trying to hit a 3-wood at this green out of a bunker, which is a ridiculous shot and should never ever work, surprisingly, it's not going to work. We can therefore vary on a bunker by bunker basis, and that is absolutely fine. There are some bunkers you learn you just do not go in on. One thing we also have to be mindful of is that if you've been playing the demo, you'll know that short splash shots are no gimme like they used to be. So for example, if we just hit this one, you can see it will roll away and potentially even off the other side. And to sum up on bunkers, looking down at it, they can be much more penal, and we should be really careful about scattering them absolutely everywhere. If you're putting one down, particularly if it's a harsh one, think carefully about whether you need it, whether you've given the player a safe place to play, and the effect it's likely going to have on their shot selection and how they play the hole. I wanted to finish up by quickly going through some of the shot types that people are likely to have. So we've missed the 9th green just short, and we're left with being defaulted to a pitch shot. The pitch shot is very different to what you might know it as from the old games. It doesn't fly high and stop very quickly. It's far more of a low trajectory shot, as it really should be. So we can try and land that just short of the green and see if we can roll it on. That's a really satisfying shot to play that does require some vision. One of the areas in which PGA 2K25 excels for me is the different shot types and ways to get things done. We could take a flop shot and it would be a very high tariff shot, and you only have to look at the margins to see exactly where those fall. However, I do think this one, whilst it's punished pretty severely for being offline, I would like to see it punished a little bit more for distance. And we could be looking at, let's say, an 7-iron bump and run. Well, this one I have not tested out much, but let's assume it's like a longer chip. And this might be the sort of shot I would play in links golf, where, as you can see, bounces up and works pretty nicely. So another different way to get the ball close. So in a sense, everything is new and nothing is new. If you knew the same old principles and used them very well, you will still make a very good golf course. If you've been trying to trick stuff up to manufacture difficulty, that's where these concepts really need to come home and be properly embedded throughout your course. That said, we now have a game that is properly geared towards helping us to accomplish some of those things. Bunkers play properly, shot types matter, different people will have different skill sets and play different distances and holes from different angles. Everything should work a lot better, which therefore means you want to be a bit more careful about allowing people space and room to breathe on the course, and thinking about good misses, whether they can always reach the fairway, what to do if they can't, and how to make your hazards meaningful, which means just not spamming them everywhere. Hopefully that helps. See you again soon.